there is some truth to sheer conviction. Some people have a real passion for things. They can drive, right? They can drive through, throw their shoulder in, just keep going. But I think that our will is finite, right? When you see people who are like, I can't believe they have such strong will, the reason why.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Perfectly Mentored. I'm your host, Jason Portnoy. My guest today is Steven Lawson and the founder of Monk Manual. After spending a decade pushing himself to every limit in the workforce alongside his colleagues and friends, he slowed down, looked around, and realized something was wrong. The ways of modern productivity are making people sick. Determined to find a way of life that accounts for the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, he began a soulful journey that has led him to develop the Monk Manual. Inspired by the wisdom of monks and rooted in psychology, the Monk Manual is the first of several practical tools designed for peaceful being and purposeful doing. My man, Steven, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great. Some of that is a lot of words to get off out of your mouth, and I like it. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper because, reading that bio sounds all interesting, but I want to kind of just jump right in and go a little bit deeper into your background. And I guess how you started or came up with the idea for the Monk Manual, or deeper into the why you found the need for it.
So I started really the work on the Monk Manual when I was a teenager. I came across this quote when I was a freshman in English class that I remember being something along the lines of, I'm going to botch this up a bit, but it was something along the lines of, I'd rather be a human being dissatisfied than a pig fully satisfied, right? And that set me on a track where I was just like, man, if I'm going to go and try to live my life towards anything, it's going to be always towards an orientation of whatever is the fullest, right? Whatever is the truest thing. I don't want to go and live a life of where I'm deceiving myself or trying to choose what's comfortable, even if it's not what's really best for me, right? So I've been in the school of life since that time for what was about almost 15 years between then and when I created the Monk Manual. And for a long time had an interest in psychology, productivity, and also learning from just different spiritual masters. And what I ended up finding was, although these seemingly disparate fields of study or research, right? In some ways, they're all trying to come up with an answer to, well, what's the best way to live, right? Like, how do you go and live a fuller life? How do you go and really maximize your potential as a human being? And we usually categorize them as very different fields of study or interest. But what I ended up finding was they actually converge quite a bit between the three of them. They use different language, but what you end up finding is that there's a lot of agreement upon what leads to a real full life. And I was just deeply bought in once I realized that, right? And what struck me at the time was that monks actually seem to be the people who are living out these principles or this way of being more than anybody. And so I started thinking, man, what's really an interesting premise is to think, okay, obviously we're living in the world, right? We're running businesses, we're raising families, we're doing whatever we're doing. We can't go and spend hours in meditation all day or live out in some field, right, in some monastery. But can we go and port over some of that into our own lives so that we can just live with a fuller sense?
So then why a planner, right? Why is planning so important?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the hallmarks, when you look at the monastic tradition, when you look at the way that monks live, it's actually freedom through structure, right? It is a very highly structured way of life. They know that from say 9 to 10, they're having breakfast, and from 10 to 11, maybe they're in meditation or they're in some sort of prayer or chant or whatever that might be, right? And for us, that can seem like, oh, that's a lot of routine. That's kind of constrictive. But what actually happens is what it brings them to is a point of deep clarity, right? A point of knowing, okay, wherever I am at any given moment, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be and doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, right? I remember, because I spent a lot of time going very deep into what you could argue are kind of the common best practices around productivity, which really were making me very, very efficient, but were robbing me of my peace. And what I ended up finding was at the end of the day, I'd often feel like, wow, my day was a whirlwind. Like I certainly felt like I got a lot done. Like I was a Wolverine and I'm going and attacking this and attacking that. And that's actually the language I would think of, right? Because it's like, it was really like I was attacking all these things. But I'd look back on the day and I'd be like, A, I have no idea whether I really spent that day well. And B, I certainly wasn't there for most of it, right? I was so in my head and I was so frenetic and so focused on just kind of closing loops and getting things done that I wasn't really present. And I wasn't really even there for my life. So the idea with the planner is we can't have that same rigid structure. No one really can live in this model, especially if you're an entrepreneur, right? If you're an entrepreneur or you're working in any sort of business setting, any professional setting, it's extremely difficult to say, from this time to this time, I'm always going to be doing this. From this time to this time, I'm always going to be doing this. We got blocks that can accomplish that. But I think that we can arrive at that same sensibility through what I call the PAR method, which is preparing, acting, and reflecting. So it's entering into the day, whether you do it the day before, and you can do it with weeks and months as well, but saying, okay, what are the most important things here, right? If I only got 5 things done in this next week, what would those things be? And try to create that daily rhythm or that daily structure to live into, figure it out on the front end so that you don't have to figure it out as you're going through it or be questioning it. You can really fully engage. You can really do your best work because you're not thinking about the 10 different things you have to deal with. You're thinking about the one thing that's right in front of you. All your mental capacity is focused on that one task, what some people would call flow. And then you prepare it and then you act into it, you live into that, and then you reflect on the back end, right? Because it's through reflection that we end up being able to really grasp what the lessons are for us to learn from our day. And this applies to our business life. This also applies to our personal life, right? Because you can spend a long time working through these things or going through life without actually growing through life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can you expand on that just a little bit more? Because part of the PAR method that you talk about is you believe that our problems don't come from a lack of action, but rather you think it's because we're not prepared or we aren't aware or reflect enough. Can you go a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah, so I'll actually I'll throw it back to a Stephen Covey reference, which I've never done before. But if you've ever read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about sharpening the saw, right? And sharpening the saw, the basic premise is you can go and keep hacking at a tree, or you can go and spend 20 minutes and sharpen the saw and have to hack a lot less. I think in any business, you could apply this to your family life, you could apply this to your business life, to marketing, whatever it is. There's some things and we're not always aware of what those things are because fear can pull us out of focusing on those most important things. Fear can make us focus on the things that are urgent, the things that we feel like we need to just remove the tension. We need to go and answer this email. We need to, we're not good, especially we're living in this casino of notifications and noise. We're not good at actually focusing on the important thing. So it would be an exaggeration to say action's not important. Action is important. We don't do anything without acting, but it's the right action. Action in and of itself is not progress, right? Like you can act all day and make zero progress. You'll feel like you're making progress, but it's placebo productivity, right? It's not real productivity.
So how is the Monk Manual different than other journals or other planners out there? Maybe break down the way you designed it and why that 90 days was so important to you.
Yeah. So first of all, if anyone's been in a larger organization, and I bring this up because a large organization has a lot of contingencies they have to work out. It's very dynamic. There's a lot of change. You can go and set a yearly plan for something, and things change fairly rapidly, right? Like you could say, I can go and look at 2021 and say, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And a quarter in, that list is not going to look exactly the same. I think it's a good idea to have those anchoring ideas, but the way we relate to time, because a lot of the way we relate to time and even how we strategize and how we make sense of our work and of our lives in general is based on perspective, right? And we understand time differently in blocks, right? I think that's one of the reasons why when a new year comes up, people start thinking in a different way because they're thinking, oh, like it's clear, like the clock, the big year clock just hit 12 and we're like, oh, a whole year just passed. Like, what am I doing? Right. So 90 days seems to be a really perfect timeline for focusing on kind of a sort of sprint towards certain goals. Right. And it's just a really cohesive block. I would also say, practically speaking, we chose 90 as the number of days because we have a full page spread for each of the days, weeks, and months. In some ways, what we've taken a preference for is depth over breadth, right? So if you get a normal planner, you're going to have a task list, you're going to have maybe a calendar. There's nothing wrong with that. That all serves its purpose, right? It's like an app that functions to do a particular thing. We wanted to create something that wasn't an app, but it was more of an operating system, right? Like monasticism, the life of a monk that they live through, it's an operating system. It's a whole different thing. So practically speaking, we have a 90-day system that's about the same length as a yearly planner. It's just much more, it's much deeper, right? Because we're trying to arrive at a much different endpoint, which is, it's not just task lists and making sure you have calendar dates. It's driving at a radical level of intentionality. And so it's just a very different endpoint.
So what's the major differences aside from the 90 days of that versus like other planners that are out of the market?
Yeah, I guess there'd be two things I would highlight. So when you think of, when I think of planners, I think that there's, and I'll put planning systems in this bucket because I think there's planners, and then I think there's more planners that are focused on goal achievement. And so I think there's actually multiple spaces, multiple niches kind of within this world, right? So it's hard to say this or this. When you think of your regular planner, you go to Target, you go and buy a planner. Those I think are very much, they're functional items around tasks, to-dos, keeping track of things. It's about management and organization, right? Again, not a bad thing. It's a great starting point. Another group of planners would be in that more goal space. I would argue those are really optimized to how do you go and achieve a particular goal, or how do you become successful in a particular way. That is all well and good. The difference with the Monk Manual is we're not trying to necessarily drive people towards hyper focusing on one aspect of their life, because that's not how life actually works, if that makes sense, right? Like, you might know people, I know people, right? It's, we all know these people, whether we know them personally or not, people who are massively successful in one way and tragically unsuccessful in other ways, right? They've chosen to hyper focus and maybe become multiple millionaires at the expense of their family, at the expense of their own happiness, at the expense of their body, whatever that is, right? And so they're choosing to kind of separate out and disintegrate their life, right? I think that the way we look at it is actually our action itself. Everything we do is part of the process of life that's taking place for us, and everything can be a means for growth, right? Like, you growing your business is not just about you growing your business. It's also at the same time always about you growing yourself. And when that happens, everything changes. It's not just about trying to get to the race of being successful in one way of thinking. But I think, like, when you look at people at the end of their lives, they have a certain barometer for how they judge success, which isn't always how people earlier in their life judge success, right? So we're trying to drive at that more holistic view of success. I think having a full life, but really practically speaking, I think where that manifests most is in the reflection portion. I'm not sure of any other tool that's as heavy on the reflection portion, which in some ways was a gambit for me, right? It was a gamble because there's not very good short-term feedback loops with reflection, right? When you go and you check something off, I went and I was going to go and sign up this client, right? You get it done, check. When you're going and you're reflecting, not only are you not necessarily seeing rapid progress, you might even be facing things you don't want to see. You might be realizing, like, man, my marriage is in a really bad spot right now, right? And maybe that's why I'm feeling so much tension all the time. Whatever it might be, right? So it's different endpoints, really, and it manifests in a lot of different ways.
So it seems there was a ton of intentionality put into how you designed the Monk Manual. So what's the desired end result, right? So someone uses this for 90 days. What did you have in mind that they look like after 90 days?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to 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 be totally honest, I've always viewed the Monk Manual as it's about being a framework that serves the process of life that's taking place for people all the time. So it's a very long term endpoint, right? I mean, if you think about yourself, right, or anyone who's listening, if you think about yourself, you have an image in your mind of what your potential is, right? Some of that image comes from your parents, some of that comes from the culture. Over time, actually, you come to realize what that really is for you, right? Like what that real desire is for you. But that's a long process, right? A lot of people describe it almost like it's like a spiral staircase where like every day you're going and you're trying to work your way up and work your way up. So it's an ongoing process. When do you actually stop that process? It's hard to say. I think we stop when it's time, when the game gets called and it's time to to call it a day, right? At the end of the 90 days though, the end hope would be that people are experiencing a higher level of clarity, that people have actually become more effective and more strategic with their time and with how they approach productivity. One of the ideas behind the way a monk approaches everything is it's a path not of addition but subtraction, right? So when you think of productivity, it's how do you add more and how do you get more done? They say, how do you cut out everything that's unessential? How do you
I guess
cut out?
like the theory of essentialism, pretty much.
Yeah, for sure. The reason actually that book is still so popular and that concept is so popular is exactly that that reason, right? The tie into these more wisdom practices.
So what advice do you have for the listeners to become more productive aside from just using the Monk Manual, right? Like I feel like we live in this ADD like world where it's easy to go down the rabbit hole of being non-productive. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to become more productive.
So the first thing, and this is a really holistic practice, but I do believe that ultimately what makes the most impact on a business is who you are, right? It's being able to face fears, to have a certain level of character or strength, or just like machinery internally, right? And so oftentimes we turn away from the things that are our most important work to do, the things that actually are going to move the needle the most. We turn away from them because they're scary, right? They're the most important things. And while we'd like to think we choose the most important things, we often don't, because there's often a lot of fear around them. That's what procrastination is really, an emotional regulation problem, right? It's about turning away from the things that scare us. So finding ways to reframe, looking at the things that you are maybe procrastinating and finding ways to reframe them as opportunities for growth, even in real time, to say, how is this right now, this thing that's creating attention for me or is really feeling challenging, how can I be grateful for this? And how can I also appreciate it as a means for growth? Because that discomfort you're feeling is the discomfort of growth taking place in real time. Another piece is to really, really get good at saying no, especially for entrepreneur type personalities. And I know not everyone who's listening is going to be an entrepreneur, but what makes us good is the fact that we see opportunities and we seize them, right? We're really good at seizing possibilities, right? That's really great and it's necessary in the beginning. Over time, it actually becomes a liability because we can't scale, right? We can't scale in our businesses and we can't scale in our families. We can't scale in general, right? We are finite assets. So building up the strength to really get good at saying no. I do a practice every week. I'll plan out my week in advance. So I'll say, here's my priorities, and I'll pretty much block out all my time, right? It's not that rigid where I'm not flexing things around. Some things take less time, some things take more time. But on Sundays, I'll actually go through and I'll ask, is this really something that I should be focusing on? Like is this, because I know I'm going to throw stuff in that's not essential. That's not the most important stuff. And sometimes we have a hard time seeing what can even be cut out. I think that finding people who can hold you accountable is really helpful, because like we all play games with ourselves, right? And sometimes you need another person to step in and say, hey, actually, you're lying to yourself here. Like, you think that's what you need to do, or you think that's what like you need to grasp onto to keep like some sense of stability, but actually that's the thing getting in the way, because you cling into that and trying to have so much control over that area of your life rather than maybe delegating it to someone. That's the thing that's inhibiting your growth. So getting really good at saying no. And then also, you know, something that's really popular today is habits, right? I think habits are great. Habits, if I can just kind of wrap it up in a really simplistic term, the idea that you build a behavior to the point that it becomes natural, right? Like, that's a good thing. And there's a lot of habits that can go and help us. But what I think actually is a more important thing to focus on is our systems. So what are the systems that we can build in our lives that can either automate habits or in some ways automate our lives, right? How do you make it so that, because I think there's, you know, there is some truth to sheer conviction. Some people have a real passion for things. They can drive, right? They can drive through, throw their shoulder in, just keep going. But I think that our will is finite, right? When you see people who are like, I can't believe they have such strong will, the reason why is because they built that will on some really powerful systems that are taking care of a lot of stuff for them. So look at your systems, right? Look at like your routines in the morning, look at your routines in the afternoon, look at your routines, look at things like, okay, you just finished up a high priority task. What are you doing now? Are you going and do you immediately go on email? And what does that look like? What does that feel like for you, right? What's actually going on there? Why are you even doing that, right? I'm a massive fan of self-awareness, and that's not because I don't think action's important, but I just think that if we really want to be living out the action, the highest potential action we can, we only get there through self-awareness. We only get there through reflection. And it has to go both ways, right? Like, it's the action that feeds into the reflection that feeds back. It's a feedback loop, right? And that's what's a beautiful thing, is when you can get both those things firing and then take risks and face fears, you just have this amazing virtuous cycle. And I'm fairly convinced, and I know you've taught a lot of people, right? I'm fairly convinced that anyone, unless they were given a huge opportunity, right? Like dad gave them $2 billion and they wasted most of it, but then they got lucky because like they were at Vegas one weekend, whatever. I don't know. Most of the people who get really, really successful have that virtuous cycle going on. I'm convinced of it, right? I think that's the only way. That's the way we're made, right? Like we're living in time and we live through time and action, right? So the keys to kind of moving things forward and taking it to the next level have to do with those two elements, right? Of reflection, action, playing out together over time.
I love it. I love the way you just put it. And I totally agree with you. But I want to also just point out something here. So you not only thoughtfully created a great product, but you're also a great business person. You're able to take Monk Manual from $0 to an expected 1 million in yearly revenue in just a 2-year period with just, I mean, one core product. I think most people feel the need to have many products in order to get to that level. What are some tips you have? How are you able to do that?
Yeah. So there's a few things. One is, this is going to sound cliche, and I don't know if this translates for everyone, but I think it is really important. I'm very passionate about this, right? Because at times, like, you're going to be feeling like you're on the ropes and you're in the back corner, right? Like, you're going to have great quarters and then you're going to have real bad quarters, right? I launched my Kickstarter. Everyone was like, you did so great. I didn't hit my goal. My personal goal, I didn't hit it, right? So I'm thinking, yeah, I did okay, but that's not where I wanted to be, right? And then after that, sales went much lower than I was expecting it to be, right? I mean, it was a struggle. Like, it was a fight. And the way you get through that is because, like, you really care, right? And I think that when you can find something you really care about, and for me, it's because it's tethered to, I think, impact. Not every business, I think, has to be that tangibly tied to something like that. But it sure does help, right? I think another thing is, from the very beginning, I deeply understood the marketplace and saw a market need, right? So a lot of people that I told the Monk Manual to thought it was a dumb idea, right? And I'm not just saying that because I'm on a podcast and it sounds nice. Like, I mean that. Like, I talked to my wife and she's like, that's a dumb idea, right? Like, the people close to me were like, that's a dumb idea. But the thing is like, I know one of my strengths is I mean, who's the guy who calls himself like a visionary? I tend to like see more in the future, I guess, right? So I saw a niche or an underserved market and I was like, I can serve those people better, right? I can do this better, right? And so I really believed in the potential for the space. And then I've surrounded myself with really talented people, and I've grinded a lot, and I've tried to just learn from others and be as strategic as I can, right? And I'll tell you, because I think this might be reassuring to listeners. It's like, you can do all those things and still it can feel like you're not progressing nearly as fast as you should be, right? I think it is an uphill battle all the way. It never becomes something where you're sitting back. Maybe it does, actually. You know, I'm not there yet. But what seems like some inevitable thing on the outside is the fruit of like a lot of time and a lot of energy, and also like a lot of just, I mean, it's an emotionally difficult path, and which goes back to my earlier point. Like, you have to want it.
Do you consider yourself a spiritual person?
Yeah, absolutely.
How much does, spirituality play a role in your success?
Man, I guess there's two ways you could approach that. One is like, I talk about like a process to life, right? So I try to use language. We have a very diverse customer base, right? I mean, you're talking about every single spiritual background, literally every single spiritual background. And so I try to use language that people can understand and apply to. Part of what's baked into the idea of a process to life is that there actually is some inherent purpose. There's something going on here. There's something there's something deeper going on, right? So that's a piece of it, right? There's a piece for me that I mean, truthfully, and this might sound, it's the sort of thing that, like, until you're in it and you try it, I don't think it just sounds crazy. But I will tell you, the people that have come across my path that have helped me, right? That have helped to make this possible. I just don't feel like I could have put that together myself, right? It's just like the right things at the right times. And that doesn't mean everything always feels like the right thing at the right time. Sometimes it really sucks, you know, and sometimes it doesn't feel good at all. But everything seems to be kind of moving in some way that makes sense, right? The other piece is on a personal level, I think spirituality, right? And it's hard without even defining what we mean by that. But Carl Jung, for example, who's a Swiss, I think he's Swiss psychologist, he would say that man actually can't live without meaning. It's unbearable for someone to live without meaning, right? I think that meaning is in some ways the language of transcendence. It's the language of spirituality. You know, it's meaning. Meaning is very strongly connected with spirituality, and meaning is what enables a mother to flip over the car that, like, her kid's underneath, right? It's not purely that, because there's a lot of hormones and things going on there, right? But meaning on some level, it's like meaning, the things that we find deeply meaningful for, like, people will die for things that they feel are really meaningful, right? So I think that spirituality is, it can be a real asset, right? I hesitate to say that because everybody's on a different path, right? And I'm not here to go and tell people how they should be viewing those things. That's not what I'm interested in doing, right? But for me personally, it is very core to what I'm doing. And I am very interested in connecting people with a deeper sense of meaning in their everyday life.
You also said, I mean, aside from being a visionary and seeing the future, that one of your superpowers is recognizing patterns. Can you go a little bit deeper and explain what type of patterns and how that's been able to help you, and how we could get better at recognizing patterns?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it's this, like, I'm not naturally a salesperson, right? So I think people who are naturally salespeople, part of it's intuitive for them, right? I don't know if that's nature, nurture, maybe it's the way they related to their parents when they were a kid, maybe I don't know, you know. Some of it I feel like it's so close to me that it's hard to probably describe. With that said, I'll tell you my experience of life. I observe a lot, right? I'll go to the grocery store and I'm just watching people, right? And I'm not watching people to go and judge them, but I'm just always observing. I'm looking at the magazines. I'm saying, oh, that's what people are interested in right now, right? I'm looking at the TV and I'm watching the news and saying, like, this is really interesting. I'm trying to figure out, I'm watching what recently happened with the election. I'm trying to unpack, like, what's the greater things underneath all that, right? On so many levels, right? Like, who's mad at whose dad, right? So things like that, right? Because some of that stuff is real, right? Some of these things are very, there's large cultural movements going on. So some of it's trying to unpack that. For me personally, part of what was going on with the Monk Manual is I saw that, I'm going to get back to maybe some practical tips. I'll explain this, and this might go into that. What I was seeing is that traditionally, religious institutions housed all the best practices around how to live life. Over the past hundreds of years, people have been moving away from traditional institutions and have been turning to purely secular answers for how to live life. At the same time, this burgeoning spiritual but not religious group has been arising because a lot of people are having a crisis of meaning. A lot of people are feeling like, is this really all there is? Like, you know, this Porsche is nice, but I don't know. Like, I just feel like maybe there could be something more, right? And what you see is actually with the spiritual but not religious piece, what's also happened is people are operating in that space like consumers in a marketplace. And so you see the growth of things like yoga. You see the growth of things like mindfulness even, right? I think there's it's fascinating me because yoga and mindfulness, okay, you look at like the Western world, right? Where is the most baggage? 100% in Judeo-Christian groups, generally speaking, right? Who doesn't have baggage? Eastern spiritualities. Okay, who's doing great in the marketplace? Generally Eastern spiritualities, right? Monasticism is actually an Eastern and Western artifact, right? It exists in both. It's something that naturally, organically came up because it makes sense in both areas. And there's a convergent point where they both are pretty much the same, right? People could argue with me on that, and we could do another podcast to do that. But I think they're fundamentally the same, very different language, but they're trying to drive at very similar things. So what you have is you have people who are being served by basically the self-help market, trying to make sense of how to live life, how to live a fuller life. And then maybe also turning to some of these, maybe they also have, so maybe they have like their world, I'm going to use these terms, right? I don't think this is fair terms. We'll say like worldly gurus, and then you have your spiritual gurus, right? But I just like flat out deny that. Like, that's not a real thing. We're not two separate people living in two separate places at two separate times. Like, we're just who we are. We're human, right? And we have multiple components, and our life actually suffers when we try and fracture ourselves out in different ways. So how do you approach people? And rather than say like, hey, we're going to go and just do this and I'm not against mindfulness. Mindfulness is like a great thing. Meditation is a great thing. It's really helpful. If people are listening, for a long time, I resisted doing it because I'm actually naturally a doer. I'm not a beer. So that's one of the things that's kind of the joke of all this, right? I made this out of my weakness. That's why I'm so passionate about it, right? I'm naturally very bad about the things that I'm talking about. But like, it doesn't have to be like, okay, you go and meditate for 20 minutes and that's your time to just kind of be present and like engage, or you just have like these 30 minutes to go and enjoy life. And then the rest of your life is a grind. Like, I just don't think it has to be like that, right? At the end of our lives are our lives, right? And they have to be all segmented out. We can find a fullness in everything. And why not try and do that if we can, right? I went on a little bit of a rip there. When you were asking how do people see patterns, I think taking everything as an opportunity. So if you're in a niche, let's say you're in the business of making, I don't know, let's say you're trying to sell some sort of luxury tires. I don't know. Maybe look and see, like, what are people all about with the tires, right? What is Tesla doing with tires right now, right? What are when you're looking at like a Rick Ross music video, like what are, really try and get a deep understanding of what the niche is and what people are really buying, right? Like what is it that they're really looking for? Steve Jobs, one of the brilliances of Steve Jobs was that he went and came up with this thing like the iPhone that no one would have said they wanted until they had it, right? And in every single niche, there's things like that. But you only get there if you understand that niche better than everybody else.
Love it. And so I think this is a perfect way to start wrapping up, because I definitely could understand now, listening to you talk, why the Monk Manual has been so successful, because your passion really does come through on it versus a lot of the other entrepreneurs that have been on the podcast where, they claim to be passionate. It resonates. Your passion is clearly there. Your passion is clearly there. For the listeners who want to learn more about you and more about the Monk Manual, how can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I'd recommend, go to monkmanual.com. You're going to see a run through of what the system is. Even if you don't feel like the Monk Manual is the exact right thing for you, I haven't really publicly said this, but like what we're really trying to do is fix productivity, right? So we're going to go, I'm going all in, right? I'm hoping that people listen to this now and 10 years from now will be like, oh, I remember hearing that guy 10 years ago. I can't believe he actually did that. Right? I'm trying to fix productivity. I'm all in on that, right? I want to serve like my family and take care of all the stuff that's important to me. But other than that, I'm all in, right? So even if this isn't the exact thing for you, sign up for the email list, journey with us. We try our best to really serve the people, right? This is really relational for us. We try not to have a super transactional thing here because it's long-term. Everything's long-term for us. If you go to first.monkmanual.com, you can download a free download of the daily pages if you just want to try it out. You'll get some emails from us afterwards, but you can unsubscribe if you want. But yeah, I would start there. We're also on Instagram at just monkmanual.com. And yeah, that would be a good starting point.
Parting advice for the listeners right now. I know you had so much going through your brain and processing and spitting a lot of value this podcast, but what's your parting advice for the listeners right now?
Yeah. Okay. Honestly, it would be take 15 minutes and ask yourself, what do you really want? Not what does this person want? Not what does that person want? What do you really want? And write it down and have that be a starting point, right? And don't even judge it. I think oftentimes one of the greatest barriers for us actually achieving what we want or pursuing what we want is because we're not really being honest about what it is that we really want, right? So start there. And maybe that can be a question that you keep on asking yourself over time. But I don't think our desires really mislead us, especially because the more you ask that question, the deeper you get with it. And the deeper you get to like your truer desires, like what really motivates you. And I just don't think that ever steers anyone wrong.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I know you block off most of your days, so thank you for fitting me in that time window. And thank you for getting the dress code memo on the gray shirt and the white water bottle.
Oh, yeah.
I'm happy you adhered to it. Thank you so much. Steven, really, honestly, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Really, really appreciate it.